This video is brought to you by Brilliant. In the past few years, the Global South has become an increasingly popular turn of phrase. The use of the term in academic articles has risen exponentially, and we've seen endless headlines talking about what the Global South thinks of Ukraine or Gaza. At the beginning of the year, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi even hosted a virtual Voice of Global South summit, and there was a lot of chatter about what the Global South was thinking at the annual BRICS summit in August. But while politicians and journalists alike seem pretty comfortable using the phrase, they never really define it, and it's not really clear where exactly the Global South actually is. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the origins of the Global South, why it's become so popular recently, and try our best to figure out what it actually means. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. First, what exactly is the Global South? And more interestingly, where is it? Well, perhaps the first well-known visualization of the Global South came in 1980 with the Brandt line. The line is drawn at roughly 30 degrees latitude, intended to highlight the inequalities between the wealthy north and the poorer south. Most of the countries south of the Brandt line were former colonies who then found themselves in the middle of a Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. These two major power blocs sought to one-up each other by trying to gain influence and secure alliances with these countries, either through economic aid or proxy wars. As a result, many of these Global South countries decided to form a third bloc to assert their political and economic interests independently of the US or the USSR. The Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM, created in 1961 by the leaders of the former Yugoslavia, India, Ghana, Indonesia and Egypt, became a platform to advance Global South interests, including independence, territorial integrity and anti-imperialism. The NAM was perhaps the first formal political grouping that explicitly aimed to represent the Global South, and it was remarkably successful in advocating for decolonisation, disarmament and better relations within the region. Countries generally pursued a policy of neutrality, gaining financial support from both the US and USSR. However, NAM's unity came under strain over time, as the founding leaders that strongly advocated for non-alignment were overthrown, replaced or died. For instance, Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser died in 1970, and President Josip Broz Tito of Yugoslavia died 10 years later. Members began to align more closely with either power bloc to suit their own domestic agendas. There are conspicuous parallels here with the geopolitical situation today. Again, you've got two competing geopolitical powers, this time the US and China, trying to win over Global South countries, and a reactive non-aligned bloc, arguably led by India, trying to forge a middle way through the geopolitical conflict. In this conflict, the term Global South has recently enjoyed a bit of a resurgence, and is now a popular shorthand with journalists and politicians alike. So let's take a look at what the Global South means today and its role in this new international order. As we see it, when commentators talk about the Global South, they could be describing one of three groups. Firstly, the poorest countries in the world, secondly, the G77 coalition, and lastly, a non-aligned bloc positioning itself outside of the brewing Sino-American rivalry. So let's get straight into it. Firstly, the simplest way to understand what the Global South is essentially the poorest countries or regions of the world. Most of the poorest countries in the world lie south of the Brandt line, and if you look at GDP per continent, the divide between the global north and south becomes glaringly apparent. But if you look at countries rather than continents, the division becomes a bit murkier. While the poorest countries were almost invariably in the Global South in the 20th century, today many countries south of the Brandt line are now as rich, or in some cases richer, than many countries in the Global North. As the Global South gets richer, this definition will make even less sense. While many global south economies are struggling, 14 out of 15 of the world's poorest countries, for instance, are found in Africa, by 2030, 3 of the 4 largest economies, China, India and Indonesia, are expected to be from the global south. This economic shift has gone hand in hand with enhanced political visibility, with countries in the global south increasingly asserting themselves on the global scene through intergovernmental organisations. The second way we can understand the Global South is as shorthand for the intergovernmental G77 and China organisation, made up of 135 developing countries, representing 80% of the global population, and its subgroupings. The G77 and China is sort of the successor to the NAM, working to promote South-South trade and facilitate North-South cooperation. While G77 and China was formed during the Cold War, they've been gaining a lot of political clout recently. For instance, in September, G77 and China held a historical summit promoting a new economic world order amid growing global polarisation. Within the G77, there are various subgroupings with slightly different aims, usually just focused more on regional cooperation. For instance, the African Union plays a significant role in peacekeeping in Africa, addressing different continental health crises and dealing with coups. In 2023, it joined the G20, a bloc made out of the most wealthy economies in the world, giving the AU a platform to address key issues concerning African nations, such as debt restructuring. Other good examples include the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which has been key in reducing tensions in global conflict hotspots such as Myanmar, Taiwan and the South China Sea, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation subgroup, which has platformed its condemnations of Israel's genocidal actions in its war against Hamas in Gaza, and the BRICS Group, a group of 10 of the wealthiest G77 countries, which expanded in 2024. BRICS is often framed as a global south rival to the G7, and has launched initiatives like the New Development Bank and initiated de-dollarization talks. Finally, the term Global South sometimes seems to refer to a non-aligned bloc of countries who side neither with the US nor China in the emerging great power rivalry. Western countries sometimes see this non-alignment as synonymous with anti-Western sentiment, which is why many Western countries were so irked when certain Global South countries refused to condemn Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But non-aligned countries don't necessarily see it the same way, as articulated by India's foreign minister, who said bluntly that Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. Even though many non-aligned countries do criticise Western foreign policy as selective and inconsistent, especially in the wake of what's happening in Gaza, in this sense, the Global South's foreign policy isn't intrinsically anti-Western. This is a marked change from the 20th century, when much of the Global South was united by mutual anti-Western, anti-colonial or revolutionary thought. These countries apparently feel that playing the superpowers off each other is the best way to advance their national interests, and they have way more options than they did during the past 2 decades of American hegemony, where the West was really their only option to gain major advantages in trade and aid. So those are the main 3 things that people might mean when they use the term Global South. As you can probably see, these 3 different definitions don't overlap perfectly. The G77, which is probably the broadest category, doesn't really have any unifying features. There are rich countries in the group like Qatar, explicitly pro-US countries like Thailand, and explicitly pro-China countries like, well, China. The lines between the global north and global south will probably continue to blur as national economies converge and the geopolitical rivalry between China and the US heats up. Ultimately, the idea of a global south probably isn't as coherent today as it was when it first emerged in the middle of the 20th century, and it's often used by politicians as a rhetorical tool to imply that another country is out of touch with global opinion. Nonetheless, even if the Global South can't be easily pinpointed, the fact that the term has enjoyed such a resurgence recently is perhaps a symptom of the fact that, as the geopolitical rivalry between the US and what we might describe as the Sino-Russian axis heats up, these smaller non-aligned countries have developed a newfound geopolitical significance as sort of the swing voters of the international community. As we step into 2024, many of us are contemplating our New Year's resolutions, always looking to improve ourselves and learn more about the world around us. And while our content is always a good starting point, a lot of stuff we talk about can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into analytics and detailed data. But luckily there's a fun and easy way to learn more, which also doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of schooling. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science and computer science interactively. And the good thing is, it doesn't take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into small but accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule. Even just a few minutes a day can help you with accumulating new knowledge over time in a fun and engaging way. As time goes on, you'll also get used to that empowering feeling of learning too, because Brilliant isn't just about memorization and lectures. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise quite complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects, or just have another New Year's resolution for 2024, you can check out everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days by going to brilliant.org/TLDR. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.